everyone, welcome. I am Ayodele Fajana, and today we're going to explore a classic moral dilemma through the lens of one of history's most influential thinkers, Immanuel Kant. We'll be applying his theory of the categorical imperative to a desperate real-world scenario, which is robbing a bank. According to Kantian ethics, morality isn't about consequences, happiness, or good intentions. It's grounded entirely in rational duty. Now, over the next few minutes and over the next few slides, we'll follow the story of a man named Marcus and we'll put his actions through Kant's three moral tests to see if robbing a bank can ever be justified. Before we meet Marcos, let's quickly establish the engine behind our analysis. Kant distinguishes between two types of commands, and that's the hypothetical and the categorical imperatives. Now, most everyday rules are hypothetical. They depend on what you want. For instance, if you want to stay out of prison, don't rob a bank. If you get desperate enough, though, you might decide that the condition no longer matters to you. But a categorical imperative is unconditional. It says simply, do not steal, period. It binds every it binds every rational person under every circumstance, regardless of personal distress or noble goals. Now, to test whether an action obeys this absolute moral law, Kant gives us three interconnected tests. We have the universal law, we have the treat people as an ends law, and we have the kingdom of ends. Now, let's see what happens when Marcus puts his plan to the test. So we meet Marcus, a devoted father facing mounting debt and the terrifying prospect of his family becoming homeless. Out of options, Marcus convinces himself that his desperation justifies extreme measures. So he formulates a personal rule, or what Kant calls a maxim, which says, whenever I am in severe financial need, I may rob a bank to protect my family. So Marcus steps into the local bank, hands the notes to the teller, and walks out with thousands of dollars. Now, his intention is purely altruistic, which is to save his family. But in Kantian ethics, good motives aren't enough. So let's put Marcus's maxim through Kant's three moral trials. Our first one is the universal law test, where Kant asks us to act only on rules that we would willingly allow everyone else in the world to follow too. So imagine a world where Marcus's maxim becomes a universal rule for anyone facing severe hardship. What happens if everyone robbed banks whenever they were desperate? Trust in financial institutions would completely disappear, could no longer safely operate, and the concept of secure banking would crumble entirely. So here lies the logical contradiction. Marcus relies on a functioning secure bank to get money in the first place. But if his actions were universalized, secure banks wouldn't even exist. So the rule destroys itself, making this our first test a fail. Now, let's also look at the humanity test. That's humanity as an end test. Now, Kant argues that we must always treat human beings as valuable in themselves and never merely as a means to an end, that is, as a tools to get what we want. So let's look closely at the scene inside the bank. The teller behind the counter, the security guard, and the frightened customers, all trapped inside. By threatening them and leveraging their fear for cash, Marcus violates their personal autonomy and ignores their intrinsic human dignity. He is using them purely as money machines to solve his personal crisis. Here we see that test 2 also fails. Finally, we arrive at the kingdom of ends test. Now, Kant asks us to picture a hypothetical, perfectly rational society where all citizens act as both lawmakers and subjects to the laws. Would rational citizens in this community ever vote to legalize a law stating people may rob banks when they face financial hardship? Absolutely not. Such a rule undermines justice, public safety, and mutual respect. So instead, rational lawmakers would establish rules that protect rights, property, and individual lives. So here we see that the test also fails. So where does this leave Marcus? Now, all three formulations lead to the same moral conclusion. We say that in a universal law, it fails because the maxim cannot become a universal law. In humanity as an end, it fails because people are treated merely as a means rather than as an end. And in the kingdom of ends, it fails also because rational citizens would reject such a law. So even if he successfully pays off his debt and keeps a roof over his family's head, the outcome does not change the moral quality of the act. So unlike consequentialist theories, which judge actions by their outcomes, Kantian deontology focuses strictly on moral duty. Noble intentions and positive results can never override a universal moral obligation because Marcus's actions fails all three formulations and his bank robbery remains strictly morally impermissible. So, in conclusion, applying Kant's categorical imperative makes it clear bank robbery cannot be universalized. It treats human beings as tools and it will be rejected by any rational society. So, Kant's framework leaves us with a very challenging, uncompromising truth. True morality requires upholding our duty to respect others and pursuing lawful, ethical solutions, even when we are facing immense personal adversity. Thank you very much.